I would love to spend some time on Power Automate and Power Apps for sure. But then in the schedule that you have, it kind of becomes tricky if there are no
Hmm.
customer. But now I'm interested after doing that. So actually, Manish is the guy that we should all thank to because he raised this. I was
Yes,
not going to do it.
but it's really interesting. We should explore it more.
Yeah, there's as developers of nav or business center, we always tend to find solution via code, and that's how I guess our mind works. But then this is that low code no code thing, which is super cool, as in is easier and more or less configurable from the customer side if they are interested into it.
Yeah, the only dependency I was looking at was on premise. There has to be some APIs, but for SaaS, what they have done, create any record, that is wonderful.
Yeah, because SaaS everything is in your tenant, and that makes it simpler for them, right?
Hmm.
They can show you all your session list and things like that. But yeah,
Yes,
so
we all
yeah,
are, four people are going to be here in this session.
yeah, I guess because I did send it to only those people who normally join right now, because I
Okay.
didn't want it to spend that much time onto that part now. But I will record it if people want to revisit it. Why not? So as you suggested, I spent some time on interfaces, and I picked up a pretty basic interface that's available in the base product. And let's try to understand it from them that perspective, and then once we, I guess, know the concept more or less, we'll be able to utilize that knowledge anywhere else in the application. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so if you're watching this recording, sorry for those who wanted to join and didn't got invite because my Power Automate flow broke. I'll keep a check. I'll make an kind of a meeting request or a reminder for myself to manually check it if it did ran or not, at least on Saturday mornings, any time. But like Dashrath, all the time, whenever he have time, he joins here, and that makes it sure that he will get an invite because it goes through that Teams invitation page. So if you are interested, you join on this link. This page normally gets updated after this meeting, more or less. And today we are going to talk about interfaces in Business Central. So let's start that. So let's try to understand what an interface is. So as per the definition on MSD, and this is what it calls, which is it's a contract that can be implemented by method, non-abstract method, which means it defines what this interface will do, and then it can be how it will run will be defined somewhere else, and we'll go into that in a while. So the interface itself, it just defines what the capabilities of it is, as in what all it can do, but it doesn't define how it need to be done. So you can take an example of, let's say, a car, where it is defined how you can use it, but you need someone who will utilize those things which are defined in that, and based on that method who is utilizing that interface, they can execute it in different ways. So let's see what that is, I guess. So when you look at from business central perspective, there are three parties involved. One is an interface itself, and then there is an implementation of that interface, and at the end there are enums. Now, people initially thought that enums were created as a replacement for option field, and I have said it in past and I'll repeat it again. It's not a replacement of options. There is no announcement from Microsoft that options will be obsolete in future. It is just an additional data type which kind of resembles more or less to options. And if sometime we need to go deep into enums, we'll surely go into it. but it is surely not a replacement of option. It is not replacing option itself. It is just an enhanced data type which looks alike an option string that we option variable that we used to have in Dynamics Nav or Business Central. So let's understand the whole roles of these parties in an interface perspective. So first, there is an interface which defines what this interface is supposed to be doing, what all it is supposed to be doing, and then there can be one or more implementation of that interface. This implementation can execute methods written in an interface in a different way than this one or this one. That all is possible. Now, if you think it from a user perspective or as a developer perspective, how system will know that which of these implementation need to be called? That's where your enum comes into the picture, because enums decide which one need to be called. Then how enum gets a value? It either derived from a setup where you have predefined the enum, like on sales pricing. If you look at on Business Central, if I have it open, I don't know I have acted it or not. Let's look at it. So I don't think I have activated it yet. So let me do that on this environment. So this is the new sales pricing experience. If I allow this, yes, and yes, next, a bit. Okay, you must sign in and sign out. Okay. So now the new sales pricing experience is enabled, which also means that there will be an enum added on your sales and receivable setup on this area of pricing tab. And here is that enum which decide which implementation will be called. So that's a setup option. Whereas there is another way of kind of defining it. Let's look at the something that's recently added into the product, which is this retention policies. Don't know about it, I guess you can visit the previous recording. We have talked about it here and try to add a new. The retention period is predefined with an enum, and based on that enum, maybe there is implementation defined based on whatever that is. So that either gets selected on a setup like we saw in the sales and receivable setup, or it can be a user-driven activity which selects which implementation of this interface will be called. Now we have talked about it from an let's look it into the product. This is one of the base Microsoft interface, which I was just showing you. This is how an interface look like. As I was saying, it just defines how this whole interface will behave, which means it will just define the methods that are required for this interface, which is there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 methods. But if you look at it, there is no definition of this. It is not written that what this procedure. So there's no code around it. It's just defining a list of methods that are available if an implementation would like to utilize this interface, then they will have to define how these method will execute. So let's look at the implementation of this interface in the base product. So there are two implementation of this particular interface, which is the retention period interface. And both of these code units or implementation are calling all the functions or all the method which are defined in that interface. There can be additional method like this, but the minimum requirement when you are implementing an interface is you have to define each and every method which is declared in the interface. So you cannot write an implementation of an interface just by saying, oh, I just want to define how this one execute. You'll have to define all these five. And if you have supporting functions, which we normally create like this one, that's okay. But every method which has been declared in the interface itself, you need to define what will happen if this method is called in your implementation. So far, so good? Or any questions?
No, clear.
So now when we have the different implementation, and you can have one or more or 10 different implementation, that's up to you. These two implementation are from Microsoft. Now comes up the question as in which of these implementation will be called at what situation. And that's where our enum, which we are seeing on the screen, comes into the picture. Enum, if you didn't know this, is not just defining different values as you do in option. It also can implement an interface. And then each value can have a different implementation if required. So if somebody selects never delete on that page, which we are just seeing, it will utilize the retention period implementation. But if somebody selects a custom, then it will utilize or it will implement the implementation which is defined in the retention period custom implementation, and so on and so forth. So just to take an example, if you would like to have an additional value in this enum, and then based on that, you would like to define a different implementation of it, you can do it, and we'll do it today. So let's first get into the product. Let me open my base app source if I can. Okay, PC artifact. Okay. Hmm. Okay, so where is my base app? Applications, base app. Okay, source. Okay, let me bring it here. It's not here. Maybe I did on 20.2. Okay, no, not here. Hmm. Base app. Okay. Now in the base app, this is a retention. There should be a retention thing. Oh, not here. Sorry, it should be in the application. System application. Let's open this exact app, which is this app. Okay. This is the base app which we are talking about. Let's code, and there it is. Okay. So there are different source code in this, as you can see. And what we are going to talk about is our retention policy. Is that what it is? Let's see. Retention policy log, retention policy setup. Where is the interface in this? No, not this one. Oh, we're talking about the retention period one. All right. So here's the interface as we were seeing on the screenshot, and let me zoom this in for better visibility. As we said, the retention, the interface just defines what methods are required to be defined when somebody implements this. And as we saw in the screenshot, there are two implementation of it. One is this and one is this. Now you implement an interface using a code unit. So let's see the standard one. One of them is defining this method by writing something like this. Whereas this same method is, let me put a space so that it doesn't close, is defined here on the second implementation, surely in a different way. Is this. So rather than having this code to be executed when this implementation is called, if the custom implementation is called, then it'll call this. So these are the different implementation that are defined, and then they get selected based on this enum that we have, where it is defined which implementation will be used. So let's keep this in mind, and what we'll do is we will try to so extend the enum so that our implementation will be called. So let me open another VS Code. Let's create a new extension. Okay. Okay. Minus BC 203 sandbox. And let's download symbols. Okay. Let's delete this. Okay, and we have our symbols nearly ready. So first, let's see what we would like to add on that window. So the options that are available as of today on this one are custom, 1 week, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 5 year. Let's say a 10-year option if needed. 10 years option. So what we would have done if we didn't knew that this is an extension, if a customer would have said that I need a 10-year option here, would have went to help and support, inspect page and data, okay, and then would have looked at retention period, which is seems an option. It says on table 3900. So let's look at that first. Okay. Nothing. Okay, that should be here. Okay, here is the table. The field that our customer would like to change is the retention period. So let's look at this. This is coming from a retention period enum. So as a developer, what I'll do is I'll say, okay, makes sense. Let's add a new enum extension and do it as SDH retention period enum, which is extending this enum. And the first value starts from 50,000. And values that I'm trying to add is BS. And the caption will also be 10 years. Finish. As soon as I just added this, you see an error message here that enum value 10 year does not have an implement interface set, which is required because this interface, this enum is actually implementing an existing interface. So as a minimum, I'll have to define one of the implementation method. So let's, for the time being, let's pick this and apply this here. So I cannot do it because if you don't know this, there is an excess uh, policy
Internal.
which limits it. So internal, yeah. So if you define this implementation, you'll see that it's access internal, which means the only extension which can utilize it is where it is defined. Because this object is defined in the system application, the system application can utilize it. No other third party or PTE extension can utilize this object to do anything else. Okay. And you can do it on your extension object where you don't want other dependent extension to utilize what you have defined, then you can make it as access internal. We'll have to define our own implementation. And code unit, which will be called as, okay, ch extension period. And then if this AZAL extension, if you're not using it, use it. It tells you that do you actually are using this code unit to implement an interface, then you can name that interface. So the interface that we are trying to utilize or extend is this. Come here and say, oh, I'm trying to implement the interface, which is retention period. As soon as I do this, and this is just the magic of this AZAL extension, that it picks up and it says that, oh, you will have to at least define these methods in your implementation. If you would have manually created it like this, let's say the same number, and let's pick up this, then you would start getting error messages until you define each and every method which is declared in that interface. So that's where it gets important that you have to define each and every method which is available in that interface like this. So right now it's showing me what? I guess 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 error. 4, 5 errors. As soon as I define this, it'll reduce it to 4. But it'll not allow you to compile this code unit until unless you have at least declared those procedure which exist there. So that's how the compiler understands that are you completely defining your interface or not. Now you have all the uh, methods defined here, and now I can use this implementation in my enum extension which I created. This. So till this point, I'm safe enough to kind of publish this, but it'll do nothing because there is no code written on any of these methods. But as a user, users will be able to see this option or new enum options which is now available and can select that value, which will do nothing at this moment. But just to test it out, let's do a message of retention period. And okay, let's do this. Just to see is this one being called. this and see what happens when we try to publish this one on this environment. We cancel this out so that it doesn't pop up a new window. Now, it does not mean that when Microsoft moves something to an interface, the events will not be available. And why I'm saying this is I hear some questions here and there from the community that now it's an interface, let's say for sales pricing, would, but let's search for Indian policies and let's try to pick one from here. Test, and now we have a 10-year thing here. As soon as I do that, my message pops up, which verifies that this implementation has been called. If you choose any other value other than the 10 years, the R message will not pop up because there is the implementation which is selected based on the retention period value that you choose. It have a defined method about how it need to calculate when the retention period is selected, which already have an implementation defined. So as soon as I do 10 years, system understand that for the 10 years, I need to start implementing this definition of that interface. And that's where all these messages, 4 messages are kind of coming. Okay. Now let's look at the base one so that we see how Microsoft have done it. So if you look at the enum first, because that's where it gets interesting. On the custom one, only on that case, it calls the retention period custom implementation. For all other options which are available on that screen, the standard or the default retention period implementation is called. So let's see what's in this one. If we go to this, you will see that the first thing that it does, that it says if the retention period is not custom, then log an error, which means that it doesn't want you to do a date calculation for any other method which is not custom. It's just a check there. On the date formula, the other option which is there, it calls this method, which then calculates the date formula text based on a period or not. And then each of these method has a different thing defined. Now I can be completely wrong here because I haven't worked much on enum implementations, to be very fair. Should I utilize all these methods as it is and then only change it when the option is 10 years, or how you think I should be doing it? It should be something like this, that if it is 10 year, then do this. Let's pick that up as it is and go into our code, and this is the one which is returning the text. The second one, the translated boolean. So let's see it here, which is I'm saying this. If my retention period is true, okay. Okay, is that a local variable here? No. This is case statement of the retention period, which is passed as an enum. I don't have oh, so maybe I'm on the wrong. Where is the enum? I don't see that enum here. Oh, this is a local procedure, so I'm actually looking at the wrong one. The other thing that you need to note that any implementation that you are defining, those method will be global. This one. So let's look at this. It says exit with retention. So let's do that as it is. I'll create a method like that. And let's utilize front. Just copy that as it is. And then I just want it to be 10 years. Then I want the date to be calculated like this. If translated, then this and then this. Okay. So I'm calling this method from here. That'll calculate only for the 10 years. So I need to make sure that I'm only utilizing or defining the methods based on only on my condition rather than looking on all other condition that can exist there. The second one, and this might be a question that I'm thinking for a very long time already, because this one is a very simple one which we are trying to do right now. But think about a situation where you're trying to define a different uh, implementation, which I would rather think about before I do that, about the sales price implementation per se. How you do that? And that is a question that I want to spend some time on because I don't have an answer, and I was thinking about it during the weekend. That how you do it for one big functionality like this implementation have what 4 or 5 methods that we need to define, and we are trying to fork it based on whatever the standard is, just trying to plug in our code segments. But what happens when you're trying to customize or defining a new implementation for the sales pricing module?
Sales pricing is also very small. It's not big.
But
4 or
then
5 functions.
okay, then how about uh, what we call that? What happens if tomorrow Microsoft changes their code in the base implementation? Because you will not know it, I'll not know it, right? I guess I'm questioning on that part. If I just copy everything and just add my piece into it in my implementation, and if tomorrow Microsoft changes how they are utilizing that implementation, we will not know it
It will be a
directly for
breaking
sure.
change, right?
Sorry?
It will be a breaking change.
No, I'm not saying about the interface. I'm saying about the implementation of that interface. They can they can change the implementation of an interface anytime, right? That's not a breaking change. So
No, but
if I'm
if they're going to modify the functions,
no, they are
then
not.
it will.
I'm not saying they are going to modify the function, sir. What I'm saying is, let's say tomorrow you report an error to Microsoft, right? And
Yes.
they see that an implementation had some problem that they knew earlier existed. You have already created a separate implementation of it based on what I'm doing right now, copying everything from the Microsoft logic, more or less. Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
Yes, it makes sense. The thing is, Microsoft is already assuming that we are writing everything on our own. So we have to be, responsible for it. So
Right, and
Microsoft
that's what my
change
worry
may
is.
or may not. Microsoft change may or may not impact my implementation, and my implementation can have additional
Yes.
conditions as well.
Right. So that's where I was getting a little bit confused and worried about it. And maybe I'll have to spend more time into it. But let's say this is the implementation where I've just copied everything from the base Microsoft code and just change it for 10 years situation. And to be very fair, this is only running for 10 years situation. If uh, if tomorrow this code, and don't take this code as it is, what I'm saying is if there is a sales price implementation, and let's look at that as we are here. Interface. Okay, which one is this?
Calculation.
Price calculation.
Yes, price calculation.
Okay, cannot open this. This is bad.
I've seen some articles on it, how to customize it. It was rather
Right.
simple.
That's true, but I'm actually interested in looking in, and let me open the base app because that's where the magic kind of happens. Okay, it'll be in the base app. Okay, so let me select it and pop this up here if I can. This is the base app, right? Yeah. So I'm talking about this with, oh, sorry, not this one. That is my other screen. Okay, here it is. Now let's search for this interface of price calculation. So if you see on different code segments, you will see in the base app that this interface is defined, and then they are utilizing this to
Think this is not the
execute
right
it.
one.
Yeah, this is on this. I'm just waiting it to load. Hmm. Go in this interface pricing calculation. Right? Is this one? Is that? Okay, let's see. This is an interface, and now I'm not actually interested in the interface, but I'm interested in. Let me stop the search if needed. Okay, but I'm interested in who is how Microsoft is implementing it, because what we will do if we have to for a customer is we will, as Sandeep sir was saying, we will define our own implementation of that interface. My worry on that point is it's equivalent to copying a code unit 80 and making it 50,080. But then in the NAV word, you can always see that what Microsoft is changing because it's an object, and then update your 50,080 if required. In an SaaS word, you will not even know when Microsoft changed it until unless you are paying attention to each and every update and what's changing, which is impossible to be fair. Then what happens if we create a copy of the implementation and define our own implementation on it?
I, I would worry less because I am still controlling it. So I must have to make sure that whatever is expected out of this, like for this, I was trying to do this price calculation based upon lot number. I was more or
Okay.
less done with it, but before that, the customer agreed that he will use a very different mechanism to ensure that a lot-wise pricing will be managed for sales. So I
Oh,
left it in between.
so
But
define
I
all
was,
these method as kind of copy of the base implementation, and
yeah,
then surely tweaked the pieces where you wanted it.
yes, I added a field over there with lot number. So every time customer will, whenever a new lot will come, they will go and define the price for it in the price sheet. And then
Okay.
in this get line function, I was getting those things, which line to pick to find the price
Oh,
and discount.
I'm looking at the implementation of it. Is it that? Yes, this one is the implementation. Now, this one is equivalent to what we were seeing a while ago. that each and every method of that interface is defined here, because this code unit, which is the pricing calculation version 16, and remember there are two already, one is v15 and one is v16. These implementation define what happens when all of these methods will be called by the user. And Sandeep sir, as you have touched on this, do you see any events on these places or not? Because I'm not seeing
No,
anything at this moment.
the events
No,
events not there. You have to write your own
no,
functions.
there are some, but yeah.
But again, this is based upon if you want to add something on top of Microsoft, but it will not be your
Right,
implementation mechanism.
right, and that's what I guess what I'm trying to discuss on this meeting is, because in the next coming release, as of today, the plan is that the old pricing method will go away and it will be replaced with the pricing calculation interface in the next release. We all will have customers on SaaS for sure, and that's where it becomes important. On-prem, you can still manage till the point customer would like to upgrade, but then on SaaS, you have a defined timeline when it can get upgraded or not. And that's where I don't want us as developers, more or less, to do something which is not that, you know, destructive, more or less. Because in some cases, your customer might have added a field and would just like to set that during the process. So again, repeating that what I said in the beginning, interface is not just it's not a replacement for having events. As we can see in this one, there are events available on these implementation of these pricing modules, and maybe your customization can be set by using these events. If that can be handled by that, please don't go ahead and start defining your own implementation until unless you have a situation like Sandeep sir was saying, that a customer actually like to do a price calculation based on, let's say, lot number or anything else for that matter. If you don't have a situation like this, don't go start defining your own implementation of it because just somehow you wanted to set a field or reset a value somewhere, because those are basic customizations on pricing which everybody does, right? Like add one more field and then pass the value whenever the calculations are happening. In those situations, don't go crazy and start defining your own implementation, which can be destructive, more or less. That's my assumption. If anybody thinks differently, you know, let's
I read
talk
it
about that.
somewhere. Microsoft is working on getting 80 and 90 into interface.
Okay, that's interesting, but there is nothing much left on 80 and 90 to be very clear. As in, all have moved to different tables, more or less, right?
That's
And
what the idea is. I have read in some article. I don't remember it. Heard it, read it some 8 9 months ago. And the idea was that if you want making a custom piece and you want the custom sales procedure, write it yourself and just add. You have to just follow the basic tenets of it. That these 5 7 10 functions has to be called, like
but
number
then
series, for example.
how destructive that can be in an
It
ERP
will be.
system, to having a possibility to write your own posting routine. I don't
Well,
know, as in that sounds,
we do use is handled. That's not exceptions.
yeah, right. Uh, that's true. As in, yeah, we can use the is handle pattern events and skip Microsoft code. But yeah, I'm not thinking about from mature developer perspective, more or less. You know, it seems a new object which can be destructive to the people who don't know the system as they're supposed to be as a developer, more or less.
See the way
Because
things are progressing, low code, no code. I'm less worried. 5 years early, yes, I would have been worried. But now I'm less worried.
I'll
In
have to
any
still
world,
wrap my
yes.
mind around because
Yeah.
yeah, when I was looking at this weekend, or not weekend, during the week when I had some time,
I was able to,
and I was
reach to the,
worried about pieces.
sorry,
No, no, go ahead.
I was able to get this interface working more or less. Though there were only a couple of functions that I need some modifications for the to get it perfect. The thing was ki I was unable to understand the concept. Today I've got that. What's the concept? I was basically reading all the articles and just copying it. But what now I'm looking at is ki the way the Microsoft is structuring this thing, 80 and 90 getting into this thing will not be a problem because they can do what they have already done is 80 and 90 has got very less code available there. So they just have to specify
Right.
functions that these are mandatory. Okay, number series has to be fetched. Posted table has to be inserted, for example, say uh, entries has to be posted, things like that.
Okay. Yeah, because my only worry is, maybe I'm looking at from very new perspective because I haven't worked on it much. But my hope is, and I'll have to dig a little bit deep on it, that if in this implementation which I have written, there should be a possibility that I can say that, oh, for this method, refer to the base Microsoft implementation. Because I just want to modify, let's say, this method only. For not this, actually, this one. I just want to modify this method because that's what I needed for the mod that I'm doing. But for all these other methods, I should be able to redirect it to the base Microsoft implementation, which as this moment, and maybe I'm completely wrong, it doesn't seem possible where I can redirect it to it different implementation which is defined by Microsoft.
If the access is not internal, then you can call the very same functions, right?
Yeah, because let's look at this, the price calculation. This is a pretty good, decent amount of implementation written on it. And just for example, if I just wanted to change this for whatever, I don't want to spend time into copying all this. For this, for all the methods now, go and refer to the Microsoft implementation X because, as I said, there can be multiple implementation. Now, there is
But
another factor that we also need to count in, which is the ISVs, because there are some which actually are built just for the pricing, and they will surely define their implementation.
here's the thing is if
And
you have to just make a small code change, sorry to interrupt. If the event is
yeah,
available,
that's good.
yes, then you can write your own, call that event and do the modifications if that is available. Or you can ask Microsoft to provide that event. They more or less, I've seen that they have added lot of events. They can always add it. Till the time you can have your own interface once the event is there and you can do it simply. You can then change it.
Right. Event, I would still suggest to every developer at this point that first try to find the event. If you don't find the event, then that's a different thing. Then either you go to the route of requesting it to Microsoft if your custom is pretty minimal. Going to define a new implementation, you should do it with thought. You don't want
Due
to
diligence.
mess something up. Yeah, take your due diligence on that. Because what I'm thinking about it now is there are ISVs also involved with all our customer, or at least some of our customer who use ISVs. Define their implementation, and that you'll not have X implementation. That will be the default implementation. app. So if an X ISV defines a pricing calculation implementation, we don't have Microsoft code till now. So in those, you know that your whatever the setup is, let's say it's not set as whatever the pricing you were thinking. Let's see that what are the options there. I guess it's best price or something. Sales and receivables setup. If you don't see the lowest price selected here, and if you see additional option here, let's say partner X pricing or lot wise pricing or whatever that is, which is not defined by you, then you should again request ISV for events if your customer is small. If your customer is big, then you either need to understand how they are implementing without the code, because that's what will be hidden, and then define an interface. Oh, sorry, implementation of that interface. So it is not another new object that you can modify as we used to do in past. I'll take interface as a separate object, and when you place ISVs and Microsoft and your customs in place, trickier tomorrow ISV they will be in future define their own implementation for these things. And as Sandeep sir is saying, if that happens in future where your posting routine go into implementation, that's a situation where you have to start thinking how you want to achieve your modification that you're doing for your. Just copying the code will not work, I think, because if required and you have used it, which is okay. I'm not saying that it's bad or correct, but if you rely on Microsoft code for most of your processes, then you need to keep check every time Microsoft changes something. You copy lines to source, how you find the lines and other functions that are part of this implementation. That's completely fine. I'm not discouraging you to do that. But what I'm saying is, as Sandeep rightly said, take the due diligence before you start defining an implementation of interface. It's not an ordinary object, let's put it this way. But I would love to see somehow Microsoft saying that, oh, I just wanted to modify this for all other function, refer to the base implementation from Microsoft, whatever Microsoft thinks about it. Because I actually don't know. I just wanted 10-year calculation to happen so that the minus 10y is set on my date formula, and that's it. I don't know what all these methods are for. And I could have copied everything from the Microsoft, but that would have been risky. So let's see what we have done and how it changes. Okay. So if I go ahead now and to modify this test, if I can. Okay, let me do a 10 year. That should bring minus 10y here, which is a very simple example as I started our discussion with that. This is a very simple example of this, but then there can be trickier situation where I want to have a possibility where I can say that, oh, my part was just this. Anything else than that, I would like, and I believe that Microsoft code will be able to handle this. So I should have a way that say, oh, for this method, call Microsoft implementation. What that happens, as in, I don't know how much easy or hard it is, but that's how I would like to do it. I would, wish this to happen so that I can only utilize those area where I'm very sure about that what I need to do. rather than copying and pasting everything from the Microsoft code, which is surely a possibility that you can copy and paste. But that seems a little bit trickier at that point.
Yeah, then in that case, it will be better to ask for a event where you can modify those calculations for
Right,
that function particular, rather than copying the
right.
whole
As in, if
thing.
Microsoft would have given an event somewhere in this place, which they haven't at this,
So this is very different examples. This is, I think, system app, right?
you know, I think, but why it's not opening that. Okay, let me. Okay, where is that? Okay. Oh, no, that opened mine. Base app, system app. Okay. See, if I was saying is if I had a method somewhere, or sorry, a event at this place. Where is that method? This place. In case of else, if event available here, I didn't needed anything else because I just wanted to utilize the enum with 10 years and then just evaluate it to minus 10 years. That would have been great for this scenario which we were discussing. I didn't want it to handle any of these situations, whatever else is Microsoft doing. So either there are events on those places, that'll be a great way, or there is a way that I can say for all these methods, go back to the base Microsoft implementation and use those. That is what I was able to learn during this week. That yes, it sounds a great way to define your own implementation, but you need to do it with caution. Take your due diligence, as we said earlier, before you start making and defining your own implementation of situations which are there in base app. Any other thought or any questions on it? I guess it was pretty simple from the concept wise, which is just this. We can have multiple implementation, and at the end of the day, implementation is selected from an enum, either on a setup, which is on right now what we saw is on sales and receivable setup, kind of pricing scheme you want, or on an page itself, like we saw with the select, and that automatically knows which implementation it need to be called to. Interface will never have a code, it'll just have the definition or the declaration of function, more or less, which need to be defined how those function operate in these different, and then those implementation will be invoked based on whatever the enum value selected, either on the setup or at the user screen wherever they are available. If it is still not clear, let me know. What we will do is we will create one of our own interface, a separate interface, a simple one maybe, to kind of get this clarity on interfaces if required. Or is it clear now, as in how in general the interfaces work?
Well, I have understood it.
Okay. Anyone else have any thoughts? Okay, then next week I'm out because of Raksha Bandhan. I'll be traveling, so we'll not meet on 13th, but I'll try completely on 20th for sure. So next week there will be no invites, but 20th is next time we are meeting it. If you have any thoughts or questions about what we should talk on 20th, just drop me a mail or chat somewhere on social media. I'll start looking at that area in Business Central. Or anybody have something in mind right now, you can tell it now. We can talk about it.
Would you like to
So
discuss
Saurabh,
what's new?
s-
Sorry, Manish, go ahead.
yeah, thank you.
Go ahead,
Saurabh, can
Manish.
we explore something more on Power Automate?
Sandeep sir was thanking you before you joined because he also built his first Power Automate because of you. Yeah, surely,
Awesome.
man.
Thanks,
If you
Manish.
have some scenarios,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Uh, as of
go
now,
ahead.
I'm just trying to explore more on Power Automate only. Currently, I don't have some specific requirement, but I think we can explore much so that we can code less and we can automate things easily in Business Central.
I'll be super interested if any one of you have any thoughts. Just drop me a ping somewhere. If I can think of something while I'm driving, which is the best time when I can think about, I surely think about it. But yeah, I'm
I'll get
super interested in that.
There
a
are two
topic. I'll
parts of
surely
it.
drop a question. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. There are two parts of in Power Automate. One is flow, and then there are apps.
Right. Apps is a completely different domain, as in apps is more like having an interactive app more or less on your phone from which you can interact with Business Central. I should not say it, but in Nav, or not Nav, Business Central 14, when it was very new, I was trying to play around with Cortana talking to my Business Central back then. And I saw a limitation at that point. But now I think that's possible that I can define an Power App, which then I can trigger either from my Cortana or from my mobile device, which can, let's say, bring my inventory at a certain location and things. As in Cortana will go a little bit far because I'll speak and it need to understand that, which may be very deep, but at least on the app you can do that where you can you know give some details and then app talks to Business Central and returns you whatever info you want out of it. So that
If
all is
we
possible in the app.
if we are looking for some examples, say Power Apps, we can use the very same example that you used. Instead of getting an email, we can put that data of creating a customer into our app, which creates a customer in Business Central.
That's
Just my
super
thought.
simple, sir. That I have tried.
From the app.
Yeah, that's a default app, more or less, as in not a default app, but that's an app that you can build with just few clicks. You don't have to do anything on that.
Yeah, I've
And
created app
yeah,
with the SQL tables, and it creates it in one or two, you know, clicks the moment you define the query. And if it is SQL is on,
the same
say,
works here.
same works here.
Here you just need to have an API, and then when
That's
you
it.
call that API, it understand all the fields in there, and then just gives you a way to read or write data back to Business Central.
Let's extend it, make a app expense,
Okay.
employee expense app.
Okay. Let's play around with that. Not a problem. Because at the end of the day, whenever you are interacting with Power App or Power Flow or Automate, whatever we call it now, you just need to expose an API page on your Business Central and then utilize that page in the Power App or the Power Automate engine, more or less. So that all is possible. What you're saying.
Okay.
Let's play around with it. Yeah, that makes sense.
Are you going to publish that SaaS thing, the flow that you created on any blog or something?
Okay, I'll write it down. I haven't thought about it, but yeah, I'll write it down. That's not a problem.
Because what I've done is I've created an on-premise version, so we can have both the
Okay.
versions together.
Okay, not a problem.
So if somebody is looking for, they can easily refer to it.
Sure.
I will send you that flow, the things which
Okay.
I've done, and
Yeah.
then you can just put it into some blog somewhere.
Yeah, sure. I'll translate that. Yeah, that's not a problem.
Fine.
Okay.
Thank you. Today's session was pretty informative. Thanks for doing
Not a
this.
problem. Thank you. Okay,
Thank
guys.
you,
Thank
sir.
you. Enjoy your weekend if you have holiday next week, and then I'll see you next week.
Thank you. Enjoy the weekend.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you,
Thanks.
sir.
Thanks, man. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.